Welcome to the Spartan Up Podcast. Myself, Johnny Waite, normally it's Colonel Nye and Sefra, but they are not here right now, so we're holding down the fort.
Two-man show?
Two-man show. We just interviewed an awesome guy who basically is the inspiration and the reason we have a podcast.
True story.
Mike Bledsoe owned the podcast, Barbell Shrugged, top-rated podcast in health and wellness, specifically focused on CrossFit, really.
Yep.
And came to the farm years ago. If you get a chance, you gotta Google and find the interview they did with me. God, it's got to be 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And we spent hours in the general store, hiking the mountain. And I remember they left, and I was like, I like this podcast thing, and reached out to Marion, our producer, and here we are. We got 300 plus episodes because of it. So this was an interesting interview because he's since disconnected from Barbell Shrugged. He's completely transformed. He's reinvented himself, learned a lot about himself, and I think we have some really good takeaways at home that we could use here.
Yeah, he's become really a coach to coaches. He's moved away so much from the physical. He's looking a lot more at the emotional, the mental, the spiritual side of things. And really interesting guy. And I love that he had a real successful thing going. Could have taken the easy path, said, no, I'm going to dive in, do something difficult, completely reinvent myself, in that CrossFit world, not necessarily the one that would be the easiest to say I'm suddenly going to go in this esoteric direction, but he did. He's owning it. It's amazing, and I really, really love some of the philosophies he shared. One of the ones that we're going to dig into when we get back, we know a lot about fight versus flight. He brings in a third one, freeze, that was awesome for me. So if you want to find out how to be powerful in every area in your life, not just physical, but mental, emotional, you're going to like what Mike has to say.
Fight, flight, freeze. You choose.
Exactly.
I like that.
Yeah, and most of the time we don't choose, and he's going to tell us why.
Stay till the end.
Yeah.
Stay till the end. We're gonna underline and highlight some takeaways.
This episode of Spartan Up is brought to you by True Form Runner. Conquer your next race with a complete training solution from Spartan and True Form. The Spartan True Form trainer will redefine your running, improve your form, and reduce injury. Save 10% with the code SPARTAN10 at trueformrunner.com/Spartan. That's trueformrunner.com/Spartan.
I'm with the one, the only, Mike Bledsoe, the Bledsoe Show. Now, this gentleman's rather well known in the circles that know him well. And he's mostly...
There's a few circles.
Yeah, there's a couple, concentric rings, perhaps. Coaching, leadership, a lot of awesome realms.
Yeah. So right now I'm in the business of training leaders, training coaches, and through the lens of first language, which is if you're doing any mindset training that doesn't include language, it's very conceptual and usually lacks practicality. So everything that I do is very practical, very, very practical. So we start with language, and then we take people into emotional development and dive into some spiritual development if they so choose. So that's the business I'm in now, is how do we develop human beings? Most people are very focused on physical development. We have mental development. We have emotional development.
Yep.
So I run 3 different companies that do all of that, and we do it well. But I've been an entrepreneur for 12 years, had a lot of ups and downs. I've crashed companies. I've lost millions of dollars. I was in the military for a period of time. I went into the Navy SEAL program, failed out. My whole life ended.
Now that's a refreshing story.
I like to tell people, like, this is where I'm at now. And a lot of people go, oh, I want to have what you have. I want to do what you do, all this stuff. And I go, well, your path can be different because I can help you skip a lot of the painful pieces, and it's a lot of work. There's a lot.
Sometimes going through the pain is what the transformation is, right?
Yeah. What a lot of people say this is, if I knew how hard it was going to be, I wouldn't have started.
Yeah, but like the hardness is the goodness, right? And I mean, I like a lot of the things that you say, because when you talk about language, right, and the world of intention is like what you're speaking into your realms. And so I think it's interesting that you come at it from this holistic ecological viewpoint where it seems like you're doing body, mind, and soul.
Once I got to a certain level of awareness on how everything's tied together, you can't unknow, right? And so a lot of people are like, why can't you just focus on this one little thing? I go, because it impacts everything else. And if you're only focused on this one little thing, it's not the highest leverage point. Like working on the thing isn't going to make you better at the thing. Like running a marathon isn't going to make you better at running marathons after a certain point. It will work,
Right.
but that's also a mistake.
If you look at it again from like ecosystem health, right? When they reintroduced those wolves back to Yellowstone and the riparian river all got healthy. Once you start to understand that everything in nature is all connected, then it's like you can't just treat one thing. You can't just treat the symptom without treating the top of the watershed where it comes from.
Yeah, so if somebody comes to me and goes, I want to be a better athlete, I go, great. And my shoulder's bothering me and my back is bothering me, I go, great. And the athlete expects for me to give them a special training program or some corrective exercise. And I tell them, hey, we actually need to talk about your childhood a bit. They're going to go, yeah, it does not compute. And it's like, okay. And that's why there's levels and we have to stair step people through. And I don't get mad about it. I go, how do we find the solution? How do we get people? It's like, oh, well, if we just give you a little bit of mindset training here, that's palatable. You can digest that. Oh, something came up for you there. Okay. And so we just stair step people little by little by little until, you know.
Yeah. Pain isn't always due to physical injury, right? It can be.
Almost never.
Yeah.
So the more. Well, this is the thing is I come from a very physical world. My background is in exercise science. I trained professional athletes for a period of time. I ran a gym. I had online training programs for athletes.
You're with Barbell Shrugged.
With Barbell Shrugged, we did well. We trained thousands of athletes. We had athletes go to the games. It was great. And what I found for myself personally, and I started seeing in athletes, is butting up against a plateau, butting up against a ceiling, and going, wow, it doesn't matter what you're eating, it doesn't matter how you're sleeping, it doesn't matter how you're training, there's something else in the way. And why is it that you have to wrap a band around yourself before you train every time? If you have to wrap a band around your shoulder before you train every time, you are not solving the problem, you're just putting it off. It's a nice little Band-Aid. So if we want, we'll go deep real quick.
I'm riding with you.
So the more of this work I do, the more I find that most injuries are originating from an emotional trauma. And so, quick map. So when you experience stress, and when you experience any trauma, it's a stressful experience, and maybe even as a little kid, you take a toy from a 5-year-old, what just happened? The world just fucking collapsed, right? If an adult behaved that way, you would think that their mom died or that their spouse died. That's the level of trauma they're experiencing. So a lot of times people go, oh, I had a nice little childhood. I'm like, oh, you never had anyone take a toy from you. And so what a kid does in that.
What we consider micro traumas could actually be macro.
Yeah, and there's trauma and there's capital T trauma. And the way we treat both is exactly the same. And so what ends up happening is we've heard of like, in stress, there's 3 different functions that might happen: fight, flight, or freeze.
Exactly.
And everyone likes to think, oh, I'm a fighter or I'm a flighter. It's like, no, you're a freezer. And where you freeze is in your breath. So anytime, you can see people in the gym, they're moving and they go, oh, maybe you should try breathing. Well, what's happening is something's coming up for them. There's something in the gym where there's a not good enough story coming up, and there's an inner dialogue that's running in there. It's running all the time, whether you're aware of it or not. Yeah, the story, the tape is running. Exactly. And then now you're in a stressful situation, and when you stop breathing, you're actually freezing. Mm-hmm. That's a freeze response. Mm-hmm. And when we freeze, what the diaphragm, your breathing is your core. Right. And if your core doesn't fire well, then your shoulder can't fire in the right order, your hips can't fire in the right order, and now you're moving through a stressful situation. You have a story running that's causing micro stress, which causes breathing to be off, and now your shoulder hurts. And so now people go, no, it's my shoulder. I go, it's your breathing. And now, so what's happening with your breathing? Okay, I got to breathe better. I got to improve my breathing mechanics. And I did this for a long time, teaching myself how to breathe better, breathe better, breathe better. It was hard.
We can all breathe better. Think of the babies where you see their belly go up and down. That's good, right?
Yeah.
But that's living in that's living in that amygdala reptilian brain.
What is? The trauma.
Fight or flight, the trauma.
Yeah, the trauma. So most of the trauma happens between So what ends up happening is between the ages of 0 and 7, before the brain is fully developed, what happens is that human does not have the ability to analyze or use logic or have yes or no. Everything is true. And so what ends up happening is situations happen and they go, that's a feeling in my body I don't like. I need to avoid this feeling. How do I need to be in the world to avoid this feeling? So personality begins to emerge. And so now I come up with these really, what may even seem sophisticated ways of being to avoid that experience again, because I don't want to feel this. So what ends up happening is we're avoiding feelings.
Right.
And that's creating, maybe you might notice that, like, maybe
Yeah.
my right side is actually pulled down a little more than my left side, and that's what's causing pain in my back. But the story gets set between 0 and 7. And then everything that happens after that is actually a repeat of those stories, because you now have to prove to yourself that it's true.
Exactly. And my mom's a trauma trained therapist, and so she does something called EMDR. I don't know if
I use that.
you do use that.
Yeah.
So it's a great modality because oftentimes that trauma gets stuck in your prefrontal cortex and it's unprocessed, right? So you kind of have to bring it back up to
Or
allow
it gets stuck in the limbic system, and then but the prefrontal cortex, you can have awareness of it, but it's when the limbic brain, it gets the message first, and that's when the reaction happens. That's why you say something, and then 10 seconds later you go, why did I say that?
Yeah.
That's your limbic brain just got in there and screwed up your day.
Well, all right. So instead of letting our limbic brain screw up our day, let's take a break here for a second, go explore the deep journeys and heal some trauma out in the mountains, and come back and have a chat.
Hey, we're going to be right back to this episode, but first I want to talk to you a little bit about Trueform. So we're here in Boston. We're filming podcasts. Trueform is a partner of Spartan Race. They've brought these incredible machines in.
Awesome.
And Sefra, you were just running on it, and I want you to tell the story.
Yeah. So maybe if you can see when I'm running, I thought I was like, oh, I'm a great runner. Turns out, like, my hips go like this, and people always made fun of me for waddling. I never quite understood it. But in 2 seconds of being up on this thing, the founder came over to me and he's like, hey, lift your legs up. And then all of a sudden, my hips are in place. So these machines allow for such a quick diagnosis of how you're running, and that's gonna like help with my alignment, and I'm sure with a lot of things. So it's awesome.
And that's really what you want to ask yourself. Why am I buying a treadmill? You know, some people buy a treadmill just to bang it out. If you want to be a better runner, and realistically, who doesn't want to be a better runner if you run? That's actually what this treadmill is about. It's not just about spinning and making you move. If you're running on a traditional treadmill, you can run badly and keep running badly. If you're running on this, it's going to catch you. You have to run well for this to move well. That's the whole point of it. Anyway, Trueform has an incredible promotion they have going on right now.
Save 10% with the code SPARTAN10 at trueformrunner.com/Spartan. That's trueformrunner.com/Spartan.
That was an awesome journey. I feel healed. My breathing, I don't know. Trauma's gone.
One thing I'll note, though, on the breathing front is I tried to fix all my breathing issues, and then when I went and did the emotional work, I did this very specific protocol. All of a sudden, everything came online automatically. The effort was low after that. There was so much effort.
Well, there's that holotropic breath work.
I really like holotropic breath work. Yeah. It's a really great way to open the door so that you can peek around and look. It's great for raising awareness.
Don't try it at home. You need guided instructors. You look it up, but it's more like you almost breathe to a hyperventilation point. So as you've been doing all this work with trauma and stuff, I mean, how do you think people's daily lives and just like the pace and everything that people are dealing with, how is that kind of interfering or adding or detracting from this type of trauma?
So people are reliving out the stories that they believe to be true by the age of 7. So they have to put it on repeat. And so what ends up happening is most people are living their life on autopilot. So they think they're making choices. They think they're making decisions. They think that they chose all this. But the truth is they inherited all of this. And most people are starting to hit points of frustration. They're going, all right, I'm just trying harder. I'm trying more of the same, and I'm not getting the result. More of the same, not getting the result. And so that's the result.
That's the definition of insanity.
Yeah, that's the result of not dealing with things from the past.
Right.
That there's no way around it.
There's no avoiding it, folks.
Yeah, because your past informs your future. Even though I've done a lot of work.
And the future's a gift. That's why we call it the present.
Oh.
Okay, keep going, sorry.
So, like, I mean, I've done a lot of work, but I have emotional trauma that's informing my behavior right now. And so there are insecurities, there is things that I'm afraid of that dictate my behavior now, less so now more than ever, but it's still there. So if someone goes, not me, it's like, yes, everybody. You're a human being. This is part of the condition.
Part of being, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's all positive. So I mean, like, how much of that has to do with being patient? I mean, that's something that I have a daily meditation with, because
I see patience. For a long time, I wanted to work on patience because I was somebody who was always pushing the edge and nothing happened fast enough. And I lived in constant frustration because nothing happened as fast as I thought it should. And what it came down to was actually, it wasn't a lack of patience, it was a lack of trust. So I wasn't trusting the process. I wasn't trusting myself. I wasn't trusting the universe. If you're experiencing a lack of patience, it's actually a lack of trust. And it's because you believe that things should be different than the way they are right now. And you're not accepting the present moment, and you're living in a fantasy. And so if you're experiencing a lack of patience, it's too much fantasy, disconnection from reality, and a lack of trust that things are perfect the way they are.
I mean, I agree with that to a certain extent, but also, like, where can patience be masked as laziness? You know what I mean? Because if you kind of have like an intuitive, an intuitive tuned in to the natures and patterns of what's happening around you, you sometimes always feel like, I need to be here now because this is happening, and you can kind of feel everything that's going on around you. So maybe patience doesn't mean like doing things more slowly.
I do a lot of waiting. When I don't know what if I don't know what the answer is, so when I used to be, my old way of being was, I didn't know what to do, so I did something. We got to be doing, we got to be moving, right?
And so my mom says, whatever you do something.
Yeah, and so
That's where I was raised.
Me too. And so what I was raised with a hard work mentality. And that meant, and I remember driving down the road with my dad, and he was in construction, and I started working with him when I was 12. And we'd drive down the road, and there'd be somebody who goes, they're just lazy. They're just lazy. And I go, noted. So my child self goes, well, I want my dad to love me, so I must not be lazy. I'm going to avoid that behavior, and I'm going to work hard because he values working hard and perfection over everything. So now I got to be a hard worker and perfection. So anytime I experience any stress in my life, anytime I don't know what to do, what's the answer?
Do something.
Work harder. Work harder. And the problem with that is there's no space. And no space, there's no creativity. No creativity, nothing changes. You're only doing more of the same. And so I had to break that hard work mentality. And when I did, part of it was I got to trust the process. I got to trust the universe. I got to trust that it was going to be given to me. And a lot of people feel as if something was given to them, then they don't deserve it. And
that's interesting.
Yeah, because we're taught that too.
Huh.
But I can receive something by doing nothing, and there's nothing wrong with that. And so what I do now is when I don't know what to do, I sit and I wait until it becomes obvious.
How long are you waiting for? Like 5 minutes, an hour?
I've waited 6 months before.
That's extremely impressive.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I had in my mind at the time that I was ready to wait a year. And I waited 6 months.
That's like some monastics. That's like monastic status, I think.
Yeah, maybe.
That's great. Well, that's something to strive for, certainly.
People in business get frustrated with me at times because what should we do next? And I say, or what are you going to do about this? And I go, I'm going to wait. And what's happened is it's weeded out people in my circle who can't deal with that conversation, and the people who get it have stayed. And that's created is a culture in my businesses where things work and things are easy. And it's actually been the easiest and most profitable I've ever been. The impact we're making. People focus so much on working hard, and they miss the impact they're making because hard work will result in low impact. It's effective work.
That's new.
It's about being effective.
Okay.
So if I'm so focused on working hard that I don't take the space to understand what an effective action is, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on a bunch of low-level stuff. Most people are doing, most of their work is $10 to $20 an hour work. But if they took a breath and they took a week off, they could do a $1,000 an hour job. But they'll never get there because they don't give themselves the space. And so you give yourself the space, and then you can zoom out. You can see the landscape clearly, and I can work 1 hour that's going to equal 20 hours of somebody else's.
That's excellent advice. That's like the hawk high up.
And it's not just
Big
about money,
vision.
it's about
Right.
impact. How many
Right.
people can I impact in a positive way? How can I impact the planet
Right.
positively? And it has nothing to do with, like, I could go clean up plastic all the time, or
Yeah.
I could sit back and go, can I create an organization that picks up plastic?
Right. So I study something called permaculture, and they say least change for greatest effect, right? Back to the watershed example, if you're trying to deal with erosion, you can't build a wall at the bottom of a gushing river.
Right.
The only way you can do it is going back up to the top of that watershed and helping to divert that initial trickle, because that's where you can have the impact, but it's actually the beginning of the problem. So you have 3 prongs of a business that you're doing right now,
Right.
right? What are those?
Technically 4.
4.
So one prong is solely focused around language, and we work a lot with other companies, and it's leadership training, and it's good for sales teams and things like that. Another prong is enlifted. That is language.
It's a great name.
Thank you.
Neologist.
Enlifted. That program is for athletes and coaches. So the athlete realm is we help athletes understand their language, their story, and their identity, and we help them shift their identity into something that's going to be helpful, move them into where they want to go. On the coaching side is we certify coaches on how to use language, story, and identity with their clients, advanced goal setting, things like that. And then I have Training Camp for the Soul, which is emotional development work. It's primarily a 5.5-day immersive experience. The last one is I help coaches build 6- and 7-figure coaching businesses.
That's awesome. I feel like I could go down a rabbit hole for you a long time, especially on the more shamanic healing type journeys.
Yeah.
But I think for the sake of our audiences, definitely look into all of that, because there's such amazing healing modalities around all that. But if you were to have 3 kind of, I don't know, takeaway things that people at home in whatever field or whatever they're doing can apply to their life to kind of get to some of these big points that you're talking about, what would you suggest?
Breathe. So number 1 is take a breath.
Yeah, I feel better
Big
already.
sigh. Yeah. You know, I think a lot of people like to smoke cigarettes because it's the only time they take a deep breath. But yeah, take a breath. We'll talk about breath and story. When your breathing is short, your story is in your face, and it can't change, and it's the truth. You take a breath, the story gets further away. You go, this story's in a book. Oh, it's actually not even true. Oh, I can turn the page. Oh, I can pick up another book. So if you can't breathe, if you're not breathing well, your mind is trapped. So that'd be number 1.
That's a great one. So everyone take a breath. And then wait, right?
Yeah. And number 2 is look at your story. So when you're feeling stressed, take that breath and then say, what is my mind saying that's causing me stress, that's causing me to breathe shallow? Now, if you do those 2 things, you can break the vicious cycle. The story creates the shallow breath creates the
Right.
story, so you can break that. You could be in a cubicle and do these 2 things.
Right.
You don't need to be in this deep meditative state. This is something you can use on your drive. Notice how you're breathing when you drive. Are you breathing short? Are you breathing whatever? I notice that when I breathe deep, I can sit in a position for a long time and I'm not stiff at all. I used to get stiff. It's because I was breathing short when I was sitting still. So your whole body will relax in a really good way and you'll recover faster. Those are my 2 things. The third thing is, I don't know, follow me on Instagram. I don't know.
Follow him on Instagram, The Bledsoe Show. Well, it's awesome. You're doing good things for good people that are changing lots of lives. So you're the top of the watershed. Thanks for
having me.
Thanks for being here. Blessings.
Awesome interview. But let's do some housekeeping we forgot in the open here. 1, thank our sponsor, ATP Science, who helps us put these things together.
Spartan World Media Fest, where this was recorded.
Yeah,
in
and then
Tahoe.
2, if you guys aren't subscribed on YouTube so that you can get these as they get published, you're not thinking clearly.
Yeah, you know what? I think about that a lot, that week after week after week, we've got these incredible people. And if you're subscribing on iTunes, on YouTube, Spotify, anywhere that you get this content, you're not going to miss any, because the breadth of what we bring you is the incredible part. Speaking of breadth.
By the way, we're doing this because we're trying to help you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So subscribe.
Yeah.
All right.
We're not getting rich on this.
No.
But you know what? I do want to talk about that fight versus flight or freeze. Mike talked about a lot of cool things. He talked about that he does his coaching through the lens of language, and how important it is to look at the words we use and what we say, and that if you're not mastering language, you're not going to be able to make an impact, because that really is how we communicate. And that he's decided that he's going to become a master of that, and now teach other people how to as well.
You know, it's funny as you say that, and you point that out about the podcast. The neighborhood I grew up in was an organized crime riddled neighborhood, and I had just graduated. I fought my way into Cornell, graduated, but I was now back in the neighborhood running my construction business. And one of the bosses of the big organized crime families, one of the sons who was my age, who didn't go to college, and I had an interaction, and his language was perfect, and mine wasn't. And I left that meeting and I thought, I just went to an Ivy League school. I spent 4 years there, and this guy has mastered his language and I haven't. And it really made an impact. So I agree.
Well, and you look at so many of the successful communicators, Tony Robbins, it's all language. Like NLP is neurolinguistic programming. It's all language. Yeah. And so, first there was the word. That's biblical. Everything comes down to the word and the impeccability of our words. So, oh yeah, you're right. People who can sell, people who can motivate other people and lead, it's all language.
It's just stringing together some powerful words. The Spartans were the best, right? Just, if we come down there, we're going to kill all of you. They responded with one word, if.
Yeah. Well done. So one word that Mike introduced to me that I hadn't really heard this put this way before. We've all heard fight versus flight. That's the animal instinct. Every situation that brings stress, we either fight or we flee.
Gorilla versus eagle. And
he said that's not even remotely true. More often than not, we do neither. We freeze.
Possum.
And exactly, the possum. And he talks about the trauma, and he said, so much trauma between 0 and 7. And people say, no, I had a great childhood. I know I had a great childhood. What trauma is there? He said, think about a 4-year-old and you take a toy away. It's the end of the world. Like you couldn't imagine an adult throwing that big a fit over anything. And that is real trauma to that kid. So when we say nothing bad happened to me, 10 bad things happen a day, right?
Sure.
And so we lock so many of those things in. And later on in life, we wonder why we have abandonment issues and trust issues and everything else. It's because we've never processed that trauma that we had as children.
I had some serious trauma as I listened to you, but I don't know. I must have pushed it so far down into a black hole. I don't know.
Years ago, so in my coaching practice, I do some hypnosis, and I had a friend who said I would never be hypnotized because there's a lot of stuff I do not want to have to deal with. Yeah. And I said to him, we always deal with something eventually. And Mike talks about that. He talks about the vast majority of our physical pain. It isn't physical in its original source. And so these things that we think we've pushed far enough down, we'll never have to deal with them. They'll bubble up. They'll bubble as a health thing someday. So eventually we're going to deal with everything.
Hopefully it's gone.
I don't want to get you freaked out here.
Ow, my shoulder.
Well, no, but he talks about that, right? And the idea that you can work on the physical, and you should work on the physical, but if it keeps coming back, like look at it. Great example. So I go and see my therapist about I get a really sore pain in the back of my neck between my shoulder blade and my spine, and he said it's when you're stressed, and it's because you're putting your head forward and you're leaning into that thing and you're waiting for an impact. And a lot of people have neck and back pain because they walk through life like just waiting for that impact. And it's so absolutely address the physical side of it, but also address that emotional side. How can you stand straighter? Who talks about this beautifully, Matt from ATP Science. I had a great breakfast with him in Tahoe the same weekend we shot this podcast. And he said he used to go into the gym and punish himself. He'd go in and work so hard. And it's funny because he's this big, burly rugby dude with this great Australian accent. But he talks about having really developed this soft side. And I love this example. And it actually ties into Mike because, the whole Barbell Shrugged thing. And he says, I stopped mixing my testosterone, as in, my aggressive working out, with cortisol, with stress, right? You're in there with Metallica and you're right? And he said, it doesn't work. He said, now I do it with cortisol. with oxytocin. He said, I walk in with the happiest music. I'm high-fiving people. I'm smiling. I'm working out so happy. And he said he's getting better results. And I kind of love that idea about letting go of that anger that we have about so many things, right? So,
I like that a lot.
And then, the other thing that Mike talks about a lot, and at the end, when Sefra says, what's the one takeaway? He said, breathe. He said, it's all about breathing. He stopped and take that big breath. Oh my God, I got thinking about that when I was rewatching this episode to prepare for this, and I thought, think about when you lose your temper. The last thing before you lose your temper is you go. It's that big intake of breath, and then you snap, and you think, what if you just went and followed through with that bigger breath, held it, and let it go?
You know what I do? My mother was big into the breathing, the meditating, the yoga, and used to chant that message to us as children, but it felt soft to me. Like, of course I'm breathing, Mom.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Right? And I'm sure a lot of people listening or watching are thinking the same thing. Is before I jump in the cold shower every day, I just do 3, 4, 5 giant deep breaths, right? Because it's gonna suck when I get in there.
Yeah.
And I need that oxygen. So,
Well,
but I find that just 2 seconds ago, I was like, you know what? You're not breathing.
Yeah, 100%.
Right.
And think about Mark Divine. He's talked about that on the
box
podcast,
breathing, yeah.
box breathing, and Tony Robbins. That's the first thing many years ago, and I listened to him on audio cassette 30 plus years ago. It was about breathing. That was the first thing he talked about. Yeah. And, all the ancient traditions and wisdoms. But when you think about it, the average person doesn't ever think about breathing, period. They just don't. You're on autopilot all the time, and they're shallow breaths, right? Yeah. But when you think about when you're content, when you watch a baby sleeping without any stress, there's deep big breaths, right?
Yeah.
And so if we would just do that more often, we can let go of so many things. And that freeze instinct is always, you stop breathing for that second, and everything locks in. So I really, really like what he had to say. He definitely goes much deeper into a lot of this stuff in his work than we just scratched the surface in a short interview, obviously. I know he's done a lot of shamanic work and a lot of like really deep spiritual work. I like it. I really like the fact that this is a guy who'd been successful in that realm, in that physical realm, who said, you know what? I'm going to go a different direction. Here's the challenge for me. And we talk a lot about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. It'd be pretty comfortable to stick with the barbells, right?
We like to do what we're good at.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
And here's a guy who said, man, I'm going to lean into a whole other area that I think can open up new things for me and other people.
So we want to hear from you. We want to know what left turn you could make in your life. What new, hard, challenging thing you're gonna attempt. We want to hear about it. Sure. Right? And we'll pat you on the back and maybe give you a little nudge and push you off the cliff.
There you go.
Like it did in Sparta.
Perfect. And hey, like Joe said at the start, subscribe. Follow us on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your content. We're here every week bringing incredible people week after week after week. We'll see you soon.
Breathe.
This episode of Spartan Up is brought to you by True Form Runner. Conquer your next race with a complete training solution from Spartan and True Form. The Spartan True Form trainer will redefine your running, improve your form, and reduce injury. Save 10% with the code SPARTAN10 at trueformrunner.com/Spartan. That's trueformrunner.com/Spartan.